You have nowhere to go. We have everything we need right here.
Step away from her. The situation is over. That's her.
It's her. We found her.
She's alive.
Yes. We will find her.
The night Adrian Blackwell found me, I learned that the quietest people in a room can still change who gets to walk out of it. It was 11:47 p.m., and rain was crawling down the tall front windows of the Westbridge Public Library like thin silver wires. The city outside had gone soft and blurry, all brake lights and wet pavement, while inside, the only sounds were the hum of old fluorescent bulbs, the ticking wall clock above the circulation desk, and my keys trembling in my hand. I told myself it was just the cold. It was early November in New York, the kind of night that slipped under your coat and settled against your bones. I had stayed late to finish inventory in the basement archive because Mrs. Donnelly had a flu. The city budget had cut our evening staff again, and I had never been good at leaving work undone. That was the story of my life, really. Emily Harper, 26 years old, white cardigan, sensible shoes, overdue student loans, and a talent for making herself useful until nobody noticed she was tired. I had just turned off the children's section lights when the front doors rattled. Not a knock. Not exactly. More like someone had thrown their whole body against the glass. I froze behind the desk, one hand still wrapped around the brass key ring. The doors rattled again, harder this time, and through the rain-streaked glass I saw a girl about my age, soaked through, hair stuck to her cheeks, one palm pressed flat against the door. Her mouth formed a word I could not hear, but I understood it anyway. Please. Every woman learns to recognize that word, even in silence. I should have called 911. I should have stepped back, locked the inner door, and waited for someone stronger, someone official, someone with a badge and a plan. Instead, I unlocked the front entrance. The girl stumbled inside so quickly she nearly slipped on the tile. I caught her elbow, and she flinched before realizing I was trying to help. She smelled like rain, fear, and cheap gas station coffee. "They're coming," she whispered. Her voice sounded scraped raw. "Please." I didn't know where else to go. "Who is coming?" I asked. She looked over her shoulder at the empty street, then shoved something cold and small into my hand. A black USB drive. "Do not let them find this." My fingers closed around it before my brain had time to refuse. "What is on it?" "Names," she said. "Proof. And a woman named Lily Blackwell." The name meant nothing to me then. It should have. Maybe some part of me knew that, because the moment she said it, the library seemed to grow quieter, as if even the books were holding their breath. I guided her past the desk, through the staff door, and down the narrow stairs into the basement archive where we kept tax records, old newspapers, and forgotten donations nobody had sorted since 1998. "Stay behind the rolling shelves," I told her. "No matter what you hear, do not come out." She grabbed my wrist. Not hard, just desperate. "You don't understand. If they know you helped me, you're not safe either." I looked at her hand, then at her face, and something inside me settled. Not bravery. Bravery sounds too clean. This was older than bravery. This was the tired, stubborn part of me that had spent years watching frightened women apologize for taking up space. "Then they can explain that to me themselves," I said. When I climbed back upstairs, the rain had grown heavier. The street beyond the window, Blackwell did not look like the kind of man who needed to introduce himself. The room seemed to do it for him. The way the air tightened. The way the men behind him stayed 2 steps back without being told. The way my own library, with its chipped oak desk and faded posters about summer reading, suddenly felt like neutral ground in a war I had never agreed to enter. Rain slid from his black umbrella onto the welcome mat, each drop too loud in the silence. He removed his leather gloves slowly, finger by finger, as if time belonged to him and everyone else was just borrowing it. I stood behind the circulation desk with my hand resting near the phone, pretending I was not aware of the small USB drive pressing against my ribs from inside my cardigan pocket. "We are closed," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. One of the men behind him glanced at me like I had said something amusing. Adrian did not smile. His eyes moved over the room with quiet precision. The empty reading tables. The returns cart. The staircase sign. The staff door behind me. He missed nothing, and somehow that frightened me more than if he had raised his voice. A young woman came in here, he said. His voice was low, controlled, and shaped by the kind of confidence that made arguments feel childish. Wet hair, blue jacket, carrying something that does not belong to her. I held his gaze. No one has come in. The lie left my mouth softly, almost politely. That was the strange thing about fear. Sometimes it made people scream. Sometimes it made them very calm. Adrian stepped closer to the desk, and the scent of rain, cedar, and cold night air came with him. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, with dark hair brushed back from a face that looked too composed to be kind. Not cruel. That would have been easier. Cruel men announced themselves quickly. Adrian Blackwell looked like someone who had learned to keep every emotion locked behind a clean door. "What is your name?" he asked. "Emily Harper." "Miss Harper." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "Do you always lie to strangers after midnight?" I swallowed. The clock above us clicked once. Only the ones who arrive with 3 sport utility vehicles and do not show library cards. Behind him, one of his men shifted. Adrian lifted one hand slightly, not even a full gesture, and the man went still. That was when I understood. He did not command a room by speaking. He commanded it by making silence obey him. His eyes returned to mine, darker than the rain outside. "You should be more careful." "So should you," I said before I could stop myself. "Public libraries have cameras." Something changed in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Interest. A small, dangerous kind of interest that made my pulse jump. He looked toward the ceiling camera in the corner, then back at me. "Those have not worked in 6 months. My stomach tightened. He knew. He had checked before coming in. "Then you already know I cannot help you," I said. "No," he said softly. "I know you are protecting someone." My fingers curled against the edge of the desk. Downstairs, beneath our feet, the old pipes knocked once in the basement wall. It was a normal sound. The building made it every night when the heat struggled to keep up. But Adrian heard it. His eyes moved toward the staff door. So did mine. One mistake. One tiny glance. That was all it took. He leaned in just enough for his voice to reach me and no one else. "You are lying," he said. "But you are not afraid of me." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to say my knees felt weak and my throat had gone dry, and every sensible part of me was begging me to step aside. But another part of me, the part that had opened the door for a terrified girl in the rain, refused to move. Adrian studied my face as if I were a page written in a language he almost remembered. Then his gaze dropped briefly to my cardigan pocket, where the USB rested like a second heartbeat. When he looked back up, his voice became almost gentle. "That makes you either very brave, Miss Harper, or very dangerous." Before I could answer, a sound rose from below us. A shelf shifting. A gasp swallowed too late. Adrian turned his head toward the basement stairs, and every man in the room followed his gaze. For one suspended second, nobody moved. The sound from the basement faded into the old bones of the library, swallowed by pipes, rain, and the soft electric buzz above the circulation desk. I could feel every eye in the room shift toward the staff door behind me, but I kept my body exactly where it was. Small things matter when you are outmatched. The angle of your shoulders, the steadiness of your hands, the choice not to look away first. Adrian Blackwell turned back to me slowly, and whatever had been almost gentle in his expression disappeared behind something cooler. "Open the door," he said. I did not. "That area is for employees only." One of his men gave a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. Adrian did not react to him. He only watched me, the way a person watches a candle flame in a room full of gasoline. "Miss Harper," he said, "you are standing between me and a problem that is much larger than you understand." "Then explain it." "You would not believe me." "Try me." His gaze narrowed slightly. I had the strange, dizzy feeling that no one spoke to him that way. Not employees. Not enemies. Not women with wet shoes standing in libraries after midnight. The rain beat harder against the windows, blurring the black sport utility vehicles into dark shapes along the curb. Somewhere below us, the girl hidden in the archive must have been covering her own mouth, trying not to breathe too loudly. I thought of her soaked hair, her shaking hands, the way she had said the name Lily Blackwell like it was both a key and a curse. My palm pressed flat against the desk to stop it from trembling. Adrian noticed anyway. Of course he did. You are afraid, he said. Yes. The honesty surprised both of us. His eyebrows moved, barely, but not enough to move. No, the silence after that answer felt different. Not empty. Charged. His men shifted again, uncertain for the first time since they had stepped inside. Adrian took one slow step around the desk. I moved with him, keeping myself between him and the staff door. It was ridiculous. I was 5 feet 6 inches in worn flats and a cardigan with a loose button. He was 6 feet 2 inches of tailored control and cold authority. But the narrow space behind the desk became a line, and I had decided he would not cross it without looking me in the eyes. Do you know who I am? He asked. I have a guess. Then you know refusing me is unwise. A lot of unwise things are still right. His mouth softened at the corner, not into a smile, but into the memory of one. Then he looked past me at the children's reading nook, at the construction paper stars taped along the window, at the donation box filled with canned soup for the women's shelter 3 blocks away. When his eyes came back to mine, they had changed again. Less certain. More human. You work here alone at night, he said. You keep food for people who never ask for it. You open the door for a stranger who brought danger to your feet. And now you are lying to a man everyone else in this room is careful not to disappoint. My throat tightened. Is that supposed to scare me? He stepped closer, stopping just outside the reach of the desk lamp. Its yellow light cut across his face, leaving one side warm and the other in shadow. No, he said quietly. It is supposed to make me understand you. I did not know what to do with that. Fear I understood. Threats I understood. But this careful attention, this calm reading of every choice I had made, unsettled me more than anything else. His voice dropped lower, meant only for me. You have the kind of strength loud people miss. The words slipped under my skin before I could defend against them. For a moment, I forgot the men, the rain, the hidden girl downstairs. I saw only the tiredness behind his eyes, buried so deep it looked almost like discipline. Then the basement door handle turned behind me. Just once. A soft metallic click. Adrian heard it. I saw the decision land in his face. I stepped back, blocking the door fully now, my spine against the wood. Please, I said, and hated how small the word sounded. Adrian looked at me for a long time. Then, without turning away, he lifted 2 fingers. His men stopped moving. The entire library held its breath. Nobody touches that door, he said. The command should have made me feel safer. It did not. Safety, I was beginning to understand, depended on who was offering it and what they expected in return. Adrian Blackwell stood between his men and the basement door as if the entire building had quietly become his property, yet his eyes stayed on me, waiting for something I had not agreed to give. Trust, maybe, or surrender. I gave him neither. Why? I asked. My voice was barely above the rain. Why stop them? His answer came without hesitation. Because you asked. That should have been comforting. Instead, it knocked the air from my chest. Powerful men had always frightened me most when they were polite, because politeness made people forget the door was still locked from the outside. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the front windows again, brighter and harsher than before. Not the smooth black vehicles at the curb. These were older, louder, pulling in too fast along the sidewalk. Tires hissed over wet pavement. One of Adrian's men moved toward the window, then looked back at him. Voss, he said quietly. Adrian's expression did not change, but the temperature in the library seemed to drop. How many? 2 cars. Maybe 6 men. My hand tightened around the edge of the desk. Who is Voss? Adrian looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something like regret pass through his face. Quick. Controlled. Almost invisible. The reason the girl ran. The front doors shook under a heavy knock. 3 sharp blows, each one making the glass tremble in its frame. I turned toward the basement door, imagining the girl below us listening, trapped among old newspapers and metal shelves. The USB in my pocket felt suddenly heavier than a secret should feel. Adrian stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. Listen carefully. In the next 30 seconds, men will walk through that door and ask if you are involved. If they believe you are only a librarian, they will search this place. If they believe you are protecting her, they will use that against you. My mouth went dry. And what do you want me to say? Nothing. The knock came again. Louder. I will speak. I stared at him. Why would they listen to you? His eyes did not leave mine. Because men like that understand claims better than kindness. The front door opened before I could ask what he meant. 3 men entered first, shaking rain from their coats, bringing the smell of wet asphalt and cigarette smoke with them. The man in the center had silver hair, a narrow face, and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He looked around my library like it was already ruined. "Adrian," he said, almost warmly. "I thought I saw your cars outside. Strange place for a midnight meeting." Adrian moved with unhurried calm until he stood in front of the circulation desk, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched mine, but not trapping me. "Leave, Voss." The silver-haired man smiled wider. "We are looking for a girl. You are looking in the wrong place." "Are we?" Voss's pale eyes slid to me. "And who is this?" Every instinct told me to step back. Adrian's hand lifted, not grabbing me, not forcing me, just settling lightly against the back of my chair, as if drawing an invisible line around the space I occupied. His voice was quiet enough to make the whole room lean in. "She is with me now." The words landed like a gavel. Voss stopped smiling. Adrian continued, softer, colder. "Which means you will not question her, you will not frighten her, and you will not take one more step toward that door." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the rain. I should have felt relieved, protected, chosen by the safer danger. But all I could think was that he had just tied my name to his in front of men who looked at mercy like a foreign language. I turned my head slowly and met Adrian's eyes. "Then you just made your first mistake," I whispered. For the first time that night, Adrian Blackwell looked almost amused. "No, Miss Harper," he said. "I made theirs." Voss did not leave because he was afraid of me. He left because Adrian Blackwell made the room feel too expensive for a man like him to break. That was the first thing I understood about power that night. It did not always arrive loud. Sometimes it stood very still, spoke very little, and made dangerous men decide the door was safer than the room. After Voss and his men stepped back into the rain, Adrian waited until their engines faded down the street before turning to me. "We have to move." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because my mind had reached that thin, bright edge where fear starts sounding ridiculous. "We?" I asked. "There is no we. There is now. Because you said so in front of a man who looks like he collects people's secrets for fun." Adrian's eyes moved to the basement door. "Because you hid someone they want. Because you are holding something they will search for. Because your cameras do not work, your front doors are made of glass, and your name is on a city employee badge hanging from your sweater." I looked down. My badge had flipped forward during all of this. Emily Harper, Westbridge Public Library. My ordinary little name suddenly felt like an address painted in red. The basement door opened slowly behind me. The girl stepped out, pale and shaking, one hand gripping the railing. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I thought they were gone." Adrian looked at her, and she flinched like his name alone had touched her. "Mara," he said. So he knew her. Of course he did. The girl, Mara, pressed closer to the wall. "I did not steal it from you." "No," Adrian said. "You stole it from the man who betrayed my family." The word family changed the air. Not much, just enough for me to notice. His voice remained calm, but something underneath it pulled tight. I took the USB from my pocket and held it in my fist. Nobody gets this until I understand what is happening. One of Adrian's men took a step forward. Adrian stopped him with a look. Then he held out his hand to me, palm up. "Miss Harper." "No," the word came out clear. "Clean. Mine." His hand remained there for 1 second longer before lowering. "You do realize people rarely say that to me. That must be very hard for you." Mara made a small sound that might have been disbelief. Adrian studied me the way he had in the library, as if I kept becoming a puzzle just when he thought he had solved me. "Fine," he said. "Keep it for now. But you both come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere secure. I want a phone. You will have one. I want warm clothes for her." His gaze flicked to Mara's soaked jacket. "Done. I want a lawyer." Before anyone asks either of us questions. That finally made one of his men look at me with open surprise. Adrian's mouth curved faintly, but his eyes stayed serious. "A lawyer?" "Yes. A real one. Not someone in your pocket with a briefcase and flexible morals." For a moment, rain and silence filled the space between us. Then Adrian nodded once. "You will have a lawyer." I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt colder than before, because agreement from a man like him did not feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. 20 minutes later, I sat in the back of a black sport utility vehicle with Mara wrapped in a wool coat beside me and Adrian across from us, his face half-shadowed by passing streetlights. The city slid by in wet silver streaks. Delis with metal gates pulled down. Steam rising from manholes. A yellow cab turning too fast on an empty avenue. Everything familiar looked different through tinted glass. "Where are you taking us?" I asked. "A safe house on the Upper West Side." That sounds like something people say right before they explain why someone cannot leave. His eyes met mine. "You can leave when it is safe." That is not freedom. That is permission. Mara stared at her hands. Adrian looked out the window, jaw still, expression unreadable. When we reached the building, I expected a mansion, maybe marble floors and men with earpieces. Instead, it was a quiet brownstone on a tree-lined block, the kind with flower boxes and brass numbers by the door. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish, old wood, and heat humming through radiators. Adrian's people moved quietly around us. A woman brought towels. Someone placed soup on the kitchen island. Another man set a new phone on the counter in front of me. I did not touch it. Adrian noticed. "It is clean. Nothing about tonight is clean." He removed his coat and folded it over a chair with unsettling patience. "You are safe here." "No," I said, turning to face him fully. "Mara might be safer here. I might be harder to find here. But do not confuse that with safe." His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with attention. I stepped closer, still holding the USB in my fist. "I am not your property. Adrian, I am not your reward, your problem, or your midnight decision." My voice shook at the end, but I did not stop. "I am your witness." Adrian did not answer me right away. He looked at the USB in my hand, then at my face, and for the first time since he had walked into the library, he seemed less like a man in control and more like a man standing before a locked room he was afraid to open. The kitchen around us was too warm, too quiet, too normal for what had just happened. A copper kettle sat on the stove. Rain tapped softly against the back windows. Mara sat at the island with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had not touched, her wet hair drying in loose strands around her face. I kept thinking about the name she had said in the library. Lily Blackwell. It sounded delicate, almost harmless. But Adrian reacted to it like a wound someone had pressed with one finger. "Who is Lily?" I asked. His eyes moved to Mara. She lowered her gaze. "Do not make me say it," she whispered. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Lily was my sister." Was. One small word, and the room changed shape around it. I looked down at the USB, suddenly aware that I was holding something heavier than evidence. "What happened to her?" 5 years ago, there was a fire at a private clinic in Queens, Adrian said. "The report said she died before my people reached her." His words were clean, controlled, almost empty. But I saw the way his hand rested against the marble counter, fingers spread, as if the surface was the only thing keeping him steady. Mara shook her head. "She did not die there." Nobody moved. Even the radiators seemed to go silent. Adrian turned toward her slowly. "What did you say?" Mara swallowed. "The files on that drive show patient transfers, false discharge papers, payments, names. Someone wanted your family to believe she was gone. Someone inside your own circle." The color left Adrian's face in a way I almost missed because he recovered so fast. But I saw it. I saw the human flash before the mask came down. "Open it," he said. "Not on your computer," I replied. He looked at me. "Miss Harper. Do not Miss Harper. Me. If this is evidence, it gets copied, protected, and reviewed with a lawyer present. My sister may be alive." His voice cracked on the last word. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to make Mara look away and enough to make my anger soften at the edges. I still did not hand it over. "Then she deserves the truth handled carefully," I said. Not emotionally. Adrian stared at me for a long moment. I expected him to argue, to command, to remind me whose house I was standing in. Instead, he turned to one of his men near the doorway. "Bring Carter. Secure laptop. No network access. And call the attorney she requested." The man nodded and left. I exhaled only after the door closed. Adrian noticed that too. "You think I am the danger here," he said. "I think danger becomes harder to recognize when it wears good shoes and says please." Something almost like sadness crossed his face. Fair. That single word surprised me more than any threat could have. 20 minutes later, A silver-haired attorney named Grace Carter arrived in a navy coat with a leather briefcase and the tired eyes of someone who had spent her life cleaning up rich men's mistakes. She listened more than she spoke. That made me trust her faster than I wanted to. The laptop was placed on the kitchen table. No internet. No external connection. Mara gave the password with shaking lips. The screen opened to folders labeled by dates, initials, and locations. Adrian stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his stillness, but not touching me. Grace copied the files while I read the first page. Names, payments, transfers, a clinic, a shelter, a private recovery center upstate. Then one photograph loaded slowly, line by line, until the face appeared. A young woman with dark hair, pale skin, and green eyes that looked too familiar. My breath stopped. Not because of Adrian. Not because of Mara. Because I knew that face. I had seen it 5 years earlier under emergency lights, coughing through smoke in a hallway while I wrapped my thrift store coat around her shoulders. I had never known her name. I had never stayed for thanks. I had only helped her reach the ambulance and disappeared before anyone asked questions I could not answer. Behind me, Adrian's voice was barely sound. Emily. I touched the screen with 2 fingers, cold spreading through my chest. I know her, I whispered. I saved her. Adrian said nothing for so long that I began to hear the room in pieces. The rain against the windows. The low hum of the refrigerator. Mara's uneven breathing from the kitchen island. Grace Carter's pen tapping once against her legal pad before she stopped herself. On the laptop screen, Lily Blackwell looked back at us from 5 years ago with soot on her cheek and fear in her green eyes. And suddenly, I was not in the brownstone anymore. I was 21 again, standing outside the East River Community Clinic on a cold March evening with a box of donated books balanced against my hip. I had been volunteering there twice a week because the library partnered with outreach programs, and because I had convinced myself that if I kept helping people, I would eventually feel less alone. The clinic had smelled like bleach, cough syrup, and burned coffee. I remembered the waiting room chairs, blue plastic with cracked arms. I remembered a little boy crying because he had lost one mitten. I remembered thinking my life was ordinary in the safest, dullest way. Then the lights flickered. A nurse shouted from the hallway. The fire alarm screamed so loudly that every thought in my head scattered. People moved toward the exits in a rush of coats, paperwork, and panic. But near the back corridor, behind a half-closed door, I heard someone coughing. Not loudly. Not enough for anyone else to notice over the alarm. Just a broken, breathless sound that made me turn when everyone else was running the other way. I set the books down and pushed through the smoke that had begun to crawl along the ceiling. My eyes burned. My throat closed. At the end of the hall, a young woman was on the floor near a side office, one hand pressed to the wall like she had tried to stand and failed. She was wearing a gray sweater, one sleeve torn, her dark hair tangled around her face. I did not know her. She had survived. All I knew was that she was trying to breathe. I wrapped my coat around her shoulders, hooked my arms under hers, and pulled. She was taller than me, heavier with exhaustion than weight, and for a few terrifying seconds, I thought we would both end up on that hallway floor. Then she grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were cold. "Do not let them take me back," she whispered. I thought she meant the smoke. The clinic. A bad situation I did not understand. I told her, "Just look at me. We are going outside." The memory hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the kitchen table. Adrian moved as if to steady me, then stopped before touching my arm. That restraint, small and deliberate, said more than any apology could have. "You were there," he said. His voice sounded scraped thin. I nodded, unable to look away from Lily's photograph. I helped her reach the ambulance. There were too many people. Too much noise. A paramedic took over. I gave them my coat because she was shaking. Then someone asked for my name, and I left. Grace looked up. Why? Shame warmed my face, old and familiar. Because I was undocumented in a different way back then. Not legally. Emotionally. My mother had just died. I had bills, no insurance, and a fear of being pulled into anything official. I was young. I thought leaving made the moment simpler. Adrian's eyes closed for half a second. When he opened them, they were not cold anymore. They were wounded. "I searched for the person who pulled her out," he said. "For years. No hospital record. No witness statement. Just a missing coat and a report that did not match the story I was told." Mara whispered. "Because someone changed the story. The name Lily seemed to hover between all of us, fragile as breath on glass. Adrian looked at me then, not like a man claiming anything, not like a man used to being obeyed, but like someone seeing the first honest piece of a nightmare. "You saved my sister," he said, "and I walked into your library tonight like you owed me obedience." I wanted to say something sharp, something fair, something that would put distance back where it belonged. But his face had changed, and the silence inside him no longer looked powerful. It looked lonely. Before I could answer, Grace turned the laptop toward us. Another file had opened, a transfer record dated 3 days after the fire. Lily Blackwell had not died. She had been moved under another name to a private recovery center 200 miles north of New York City. At the bottom of the page was an authorization signature. Adrian leaned closer. The last of the color drained from his face. "That is impossible," he whispered. I read the name beneath the signature, and the room tilted. Thomas Blackwell, Adrian's uncle. The name Thomas Blackwell sat on the screen like a hand pressed over a mouth. Nobody spoke. Adrian stared at it, and I watched the man who had made an entire library go silent struggle with a silence that did not obey him. His uncle, his blood, the person who had signed Lily out of the world and into a lie. Mara covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filling but not spilling over, as if even crying felt too dangerous in that room. Grace Carter adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the laptop. "This is a transfer authorization," she said carefully. "It does not prove motive, but it proves someone with your family authority moved her after the clinic fire." Adrian did not look at her. "Thomas told me he identified her." His voice was low, almost flat. "He told me there was nothing left to question." The words made my stomach twist, not because they were loud, but because they were not. Grief sounded different when it had been trained to wear a suit. Adrian reached for his phone, then stopped, his thumb hovering over the screen. I thought he would call someone and give an order that would make the city shift under our feet. Instead, he set the phone down and pressed both hands against the counter, head lowered. He did not kneel. Men like him probably never learned how. But something in him bowed anyway. "I owe you more than I knew," he said. It took me a second to realize he was speaking to me. "You do not owe me anything. You saved Lily." I helped a woman breathe for 5 more minutes until paramedics reached her. That is not a debt. That is what people are supposed to do. He lifted his eyes, and the look in them unsettled me. Not possession this time. Not calculation. Gratitude, maybe, but sharpened by guilt until it looked almost painful. People are supposed to do many things, Emily. Most do not. The way he said my name made the warm kitchen feel suddenly too small. I looked away first, angry with myself for noticing. By sunrise, the brownstone had become a quiet command center. Grace made copies. Mara gave a formal statement. Adrian's people moved in and out with coffee, documents, and clean clothes, never raising their voices, never looking surprised. I sat near the window wearing an oversized gray sweater someone had handed me, watching daylight turn the wet street silver. I had not slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily in that clinic hallway, her hand gripping my wrist, asking not to be taken back. At 8:12 in the morning, my phone rang. The number belonged to the Women's Support Center near the library. My chest tightened before I answered. "Emily," Mrs. Alvarez said, breathless with confusion. "Did you know about this?" "Know about what?" "The building. The overdue lease. The repairs. Someone paid everything. Not just this month. The entire mortgage was purchased through a foundation, and they are saying we can stay permanently. They are sending contractors this afternoon." I turned slowly. Adrian stood across the room near the fireplace, phone in hand, watching me with the calm expression of a man who had just moved a mountain and expected the landscape to thank him. I ended the call without saying goodbye. "You bought the center. I protected it. You bought it. Your shelter was vulnerable. It was ours." My voice rose before I could smooth it down. Mara looked up from her mug. Grace went very still. Adrian's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. "Voss knew where to pressure you. Thomas may know too. Ownership creates protection." "No," I said, standing. "Ownership creates control. You just put your name, or some foundation wearing your name, over the only place those women felt was not owned by a man." He looked genuinely struck. That should have softened me. It did not. I was too tired, too cold, too full of all the ways powerful people renamed taking as helping. "I was trying to repay you," he said. "Then say thank you." The room went quiet. He blinked once. What? Say thank you. Say you are sorry. Ask what we need. Do not buy our walls and call it kindness. His hand tightened around the phone, then loosened. Outside, a school bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Normal life kept moving, rude and impossible. I stepped closer, my voice lower now, but steadier. You still think power can replace humanity? Adrian looked at me as if I had placed something sharper than a knife on the table between us. For a moment, I thought he would defend himself. Powerful men usually did. They built entire rooms out of reasons, then asked you to admire the architecture. But Adrian only lowered his eyes to the phone in his hand and set it face down on the mantel. The small sound it made against the wood felt louder than an apology. Thank you, he said. 2 words. Plain. Uneasy. Almost unfamiliar in his mouth. I stood very still because I had not expected obedience to sound like that. Then he added, and I am sorry. Mara looked up. Grace stopped writing. Even the men near the door seemed to forget how to breathe. Adrian Blackwell, who could make cars appear on dark streets and lawyers arrive before sunrise, looked at me without any armor in his face and said, I should have asked what you needed. I wanted to stay angry. It was safer. Anger kept distance clean. But his voice had no performance in it, no polished charm, no attempt to turn humility into another kind of control. It was just there, quiet and flawed. Then ask now, I said. He nodded once. What do you need? I looked toward Mara first. She was wrapped in a blanket, shoulders rounded, eyes fixed on the untouched bowl of oatmeal in front of her. She needs rest. Real rest. No questions for at least 2 hours. Grace needs copies of everything somewhere you cannot erase them if this becomes inconvenient. The center needs its ownership placed in an independent trust run by women who actually work there. And I need to call my supervisor before the police hear my library became a midnight meeting place. Adrian, listen without interrupting. That alone felt like a small miracle. Done, he said. Not done. Agreed. His mouth moved slightly, almost a smile, then stopped. Agreed. By noon, the brownstone had settled into a strange rhythm. Grace was on the phone with someone at the district attorney's office, using careful words that revealed nothing and preserved everything. Mara slept on the sofa under a cream quilt. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down every detail I remembered from the library, from Voss, from the clinic 5 years ago. Adrian stayed near the window, speaking in low tones to his people. I caught pieces. Thomas. Recovery Center. Private road. No contact until verified. He never raised his voice, but each word had weight. Then a man entered through the back door without knocking. Older, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and a navy suit too formal for the hour. The room changed instantly. Not with fear this time. With history. Adrian turned. Uncle Thomas. The name hit me before the face did. Thomas Blackwell smiled like a family photograph that had learned to lie. Adrian, he said warmly. I heard there was trouble. My fingers tightened around the pen. Grace closed her briefcase halfway. One of Adrian's men stepped closer to Mara, not touching her, just shifting into the space between her and the room. Thomas noticed everything. His eyes passed over the laptop, the documents, Mara asleep on the sofa, and finally me. They paused there. Not long. Long enough. And this must be the librarian, he said. Emily Harper, is it? I had not told him my name. Adrian's voice went quiet. How do you know her? Thomas chuckled softly. My dear boy, when a civilian gets pulled into family affairs, I make it my business to know. There it was. A word that made me feel erased. Civilian. As if my life was a sidewalk they had accidentally stepped onto. Adrian moved one step forward. You should not be here. Neither should half the people in this room. Thomas looked at the sleeping Mara. Especially her. Mara stirred at the sound of his voice. Her eyes opened. The moment she saw him, all color left her face. She whispered one sentence so softly I almost missed it. He was the one at the clinic. Adrian turned toward her, and in that single second, every light in the brownstone flickered off. The kitchen plunged into gray winter dimness. A phone began ringing somewhere upstairs. One of the men cursed under his breath, then caught himself. Emergency lights glowed along the hallway. When the power returned 30 seconds later, Thomas Blackwell was still standing by the door, hands visible, expression calm. Mara was awake and shaking. Grace was demanding that no one move. Adrian looked at me first. Always too late. I would remember that. He looked at me first, as if making sure I was still there. But I was not. My chair was empty. My legal pad lay open on the table. And beside it, in blue ink, someone had written 5 words that made the room go silent. She came with me willingly. I did go with him willingly, but willingness is a complicated word when someone places your past in one hand and someone else's life in the other. During those 30 seconds of darkness, Thomas Blackwell did not grab me, did not threaten me, did not even raise his voice. He only stepped close enough for me to hear him over the emergency alarm and said, "Lily is alive, and if Adrian follows the first emotion in his body, she will disappear before sunset." Then he showed me a photograph on his phone. A woman in a gray sweater sitting beside a window, older than the girl I had pulled from the clinic hallway, thinner, but unmistakably alive. Lily Blackwell. Her green eyes were turned toward the camera, as if she knew someone would one day need proof that breathing was still possible. "Come with me," Thomas said, calm as winter. "Or let Adrian turn this into a family war before he learns where she is." I thought of Adrian's face when he saw the signature. I thought of Mara shaking under that blanket. I thought of all the women I had helped who survived one locked room only to be trapped in another by men who said they knew best. So I picked up my coat, left the USB copy with Grace, wrote the note, and walked out through the back door with my pulse hammering so hard it made my ears ring. Thomas's car was a dark sedan parked in the alley behind the brownstone. It smelled like leather, peppermint, and old money. I sat in the back seat with my hands folded in my lap, forcing myself to breathe slowly. He did not sit beside me. He took the front passenger seat, which somehow made him feel even more dangerous, like a man who preferred mirrors to direct confrontation. "You are either very loyal or very foolish," he said as the car pulled into traffic. "I have been called both." "By Adrian?" "Not yet." Thomas smiled at the windshield. "Give him time." The city outside looked washed clean by rain and morning light, but something had changed. At first, I could not name it. Then I noticed the delivery trucks idling without unloading. The corner deli owner standing outside with his phone pressed to his ear. 2 men in suits closing the doors of a private club at 1 in the afternoon. A black car turning onto Amsterdam Avenue. Then another appearing half a block behind us, then falling back when Thomas's driver changed lanes. New York did not stop for weather, grief, or fear. But that day, pieces of it began slowing down, as if an invisible hand had reached beneath the streets and tightened every wire. Thomas glanced at the side mirror. "He is already moving." I looked out the window, and my mouth went dry. Adrian, my nephew, does not panic. He removes options from everyone around him until the only remaining path leads to what he wants. I wanted that to sound monstrous. Instead, it sounded lonely. A man turning an entire city quiet because one person had vanished from a room he believed he controlled. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I had forgotten it was there. Thomas noticed, but did not stop me. The message was from an unknown number, but I knew before opening it. "Emily, tell me you are safe." No command, no accusation, no demand, just 7 words, and somehow they broke something open in my chest. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Thomas watched me through the mirror. "Careful," he said softly. "Adrian has always mistaken concern for ownership." I lifted my eyes to his reflection. "And you mistake calm for innocence." His smile faded. For the first time, I saw a crack in him, small but real. The car turned off the avenue and headed toward a church at the edge of Riverside Drive. Old stone, dark windows. Doors chained shut except for one side entrance propped open with a brick. My hands went cold. On the front steps, caught against the iron railing, was my blue scarf from the library. I had not lost it. Someone had placed it there. Thomas opened his door and said, "She is inside." I did not move. "Lily." He looked back at me, and the city seemed to hold its breath. "If you still want the truth, Miss Harper, this is where it starts costing more than courage." The church smelled like dust, rainwater, and old candles that had burned out years before. My footsteps sounded too loud on the stone floor as Thomas led me through the side entrance, past rows of covered pews and stained glass windows darkened by the gray afternoon. The city outside felt impossibly far away, as if the moment I stepped inside, New York had folded itself shut behind me. My blue scarf hung over the railing near the altar, placed carefully, almost tenderly, like proof that someone had wanted me to know I was expected. "Where is Lily?" I asked. Thomas did not answer right away. He walked to the front pew, brushed dust from the wood with 2 fingers, and sat as though this were a business meeting instead of an abandoned church with a missing woman at the center of it. Alive, he said. That is what matters. No. What matters is whether she is free. His eyes lifted to mine. For the first time, I saw irritation move through his calm. Good. Calm men made mistakes when their calm stopped working. I stayed standing. I wanted him looking up at me. Small things mattered. You hid her from Adrian, I said. You let him mourn her for 5 years. I kept her away from a world that would have used her. You mean your world. Our world, he corrected. The Blackwell name is not a family. It is an ecosystem. Every person in it survives by understanding where they belong. I thought of Adrian saying almost the same thing, but with less certainty now, as if I had placed a question inside him that would not leave. Thomas had no such question. Men like him did not doubt themselves. They called control protection and expected gratitude for the cage. Mara stole the files because she found Lily, I said. That is why Voss wanted her. That is why you came to the brownstone before Adrian could verify anything. Thomas smiled faintly. You listen well. Quiet women usually do. His smile thinned. Behind the altar, a door opened. I turned so quickly my heart kicked against my ribs. A woman stood in the shadowed doorway with a wool blanket around her shoulders. Dark hair, pale skin, green eyes. Older than the photograph, but not broken by it. Lily Blackwell looked at me like she was seeing a ghost who had once carried her toward air. You, she whispered. My throat closed. Lily. She stepped forward, but Thomas lifted one hand, and she stopped. Not because he touched her, because she had learned the meaning of that hand. My anger came cold then. Not loud, not shaking, cold enough to think clearly. You said she was here willingly, I said. Thomas looked almost bored. She is not a prisoner. Then let her leave with me. You overestimate your position. No, I said softly. You overestimate how much silence means agreement. His gaze sharpened. I reached into my coat pocket and felt my phone, still connected to the call I had made before entering the church. Grace Carter had answered on the second ring and said nothing after I whispered the address. That was the thing about being ordinary. Powerful men forgot you knew how to use ordinary tools. Phones, notes, witnesses, memory. You wanted Adrian emotional, I said. You wanted him rushing and angry so you could call him unstable. You wanted Lily hidden long enough to keep whatever you built in his absence. But you forgot something. Thomas stood slowly. And what is that? Women who are dismissed as small learn to keep receipts. Lily's eyes moved to my pocket. Understanding flickered there. Hope, too, fragile as matchlight. A sound came from the rear of the church. The heavy side door opening. Slow footsteps crossing stone. Thomas did not turn, but I saw his expression change when Adrian's voice cut through the cold air behind me. Step away from her. Thomas. I turned. Adrian stood beneath the broken choir loft. Rain on his overcoat, Grace Carter beside him. 2 uniformed officers waiting near the entrance. No storm in his face. No reckless fury. Just control, reshaped by restraint. Thomas stared at me with quiet disbelief. I looked back at him and finally let my hand leave my pocket, the call still glowing on the screen. Men like you fear quiet women, I said, my voice steady enough to fill the church. Because we remember everything. For one heartbeat, Thomas Blackwell looked more offended than afraid. That was how I knew he had never truly believed consequences could reach him. He stood near the altar in his polished shoes and perfect coat, surrounded by dust, candles, and the sister he had hidden from the world. And still his face held the calm insult of a man who expected the room to rearrange itself around his version of the truth. Adrian did not move toward him. That mattered. Every person in the church seemed to understand what restraint was costing him. Grace Carter stepped forward first, her briefcase in one hand, her phone in the other, her voice crisp enough to cut through the cold. Thomas Blackwell, the district attorney's office has received copies of the transfer records, financial documents, and recorded statements connected to Lily Blackwell's disappearance. One of the officers moved beside her, careful and professional. Thomas finally looked at Adrian. You brought outsiders into family business. Adrian's face did not change, but something in his eyes tightened. You made my sister a secret. Lily let out a small sound behind me. I turned just enough to see her clutch the blanket closer around her shoulders, not because she was cold, but because freedom can be frightening when you have spent years being told the door is too dangerous to open. I reached for her hand. She took it immediately. Her fingers were thin, cold, and alive. Thomas saw that too. His gaze dropped to our joined hands, and for the first time, real anger broke through his mask. "You think this woman saved you?" he asked Lily. "You think my nephew can protect you? He cannot even protect himself from a librarian with a martyr complex." Adrian took one step forward. The entire church seemed to brace. The officers shifted. Grace said his name softly. I felt Lily's hand tighten around mine. Then Adrian looked at me. Not for permission. Not the way he had looked at me in the library, trying to read whether I would yield. This was different. He was standing at the edge of the man he had always been, asking silently whether there was another way to remain standing. I shook my head once. Not out of fear. Out of faith in the person he might become if he chose not to let rage make the decision for him. "The truth is enough," I said. My voice was quiet, but it reached him. Adrian closed his hand slowly, then opened it again. He stepped back. Such a small movement. Only 12 inches, maybe less. But the room changed around it. Thomas stared at him as if Adrian had done something impossible. Maybe he had. "You are letting them handle this?" Thomas asked, disbelief sharpening every word. Adrian's voice was low. "No. I am letting Lily decide what happens to her life now." Lily began to cry then, silently, without hiding her face. Grace moved to her side, gentle and steady, explaining that she was safe, that she could make a statement when she was ready, that no one would force her to leave with anyone. No one. I watched those words land inside Lily like light through stained glass. Thomas kept talking as the officers escorted him toward the side door, but his words had lost their weight. Without everyone's fear holding them up, they were only noise. When the door closed behind him, the church exhaled. Adrian did not go to Lily right away. He stood several feet from her, hands visible, face unguarded in a way that made him look younger and more wounded than I expected. "Lily," he said. Just her name. Nothing else. She looked at him for a long time. Then she let go of my hand and walked to her brother. He did not reach first. He waited. When she stepped into his arms, his eyes closed as if the whole city had finally stopped pressing on his chest. I turned away, giving them the only privacy an abandoned church could offer. Grace stood beside me near the altar. "You did well," she said. I looked at Adrian, holding his sister like something returned from the edge of a dream. "So did he," I whispered. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time since midnight, the silence did not feel like a warning. It felt like a choice. 3 weeks later, the library smelled like floor polish, printer paper, and the first clean morning after a long season of rain. The front windows had been repaired. The old cameras finally worked. The basement archive had a new lock, and the children's reading nook had a fresh paper banner that said "Welcome Back" in crooked crayon letters. I kept pretending those small things were enough to make everything feel normal again. They were not. Normal had become a coat I could still wear, but it no longer fit the same. Mara was in a protected apartment outside the city, working with Grace Carter in the district attorney's office. Lily was recovering quietly, choosing her own doctors, her own address, her own name on her own mailbox. The Women's Support Center had been placed into an independent trust, exactly as I asked, with Mrs. Alvarez as director and no Blackwell signature anywhere near the front door. Adrian had done all of it without asking for credit. That was the part one thought about most. Not the cars, not the money, not the way entire streets seemed to soften when he entered them. I thought about the restraint, the way he had stepped back in that church, the way he had let truth do what power always wanted to do faster. It was almost closing time when I saw him through the front window. No black sport utility vehicles, no men in suits, no umbrella, even though a light drizzle silvered the sidewalk. Just Adrian Blackwell standing under the street lamp with his hands in the pockets of a dark wool coat, looking strangely out of place in front of a public library that smelled like tape, dust, and overdue notices. I unlocked the door before he knocked. "We are closed," I said. His mouth curved slightly. "I know. No entourage tonight." "No," he glanced past me at the quiet room. "I thought you might prefer the truth without witnesses." I stepped aside, and he entered carefully, like a man walking into a church. For a while, neither of us spoke. The old wall clock ticked above the desk. Rain touched the glass with soft fingers. He looked at the repaired camera in the corner, then at the staff door, then finally at me. I came to return something. From inside his coat, he took out my blue scarf. Cleaned. Folded. No longer caught on a church railing like a warning. I accepted it with both hands, and for reasons I could not explain, that simple weight almost made me cry. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. I am learning that those words matter. They do. So does asking. His voice lowered. "May I sit?" I looked at him for a moment, then nodded toward the reading table by the window. He sat. Not behind the desk. Not in the chair that faced the room like a throne. Just in one of the wooden library chairs where teenagers did homework and old men read newspapers. It made him seem less impossible. "Lily asked me to tell you she remembers your coat," he said. "She said it smelled like lavender and old books." I smiled despite myself. It was from a thrift store in Queens. It probably smelled like someone's attic. To her, it smelled like being found. The words settled between us softly. I looked down at the scarf in my hands. "Why are you really here, Adrian?" He did not hide from the question. "Because the first night I met you, I said something that made protection sound like possession. I thought naming you under my world would keep you safe." His eyes held mine, steady and unarmed. "You taught me that safety without choice is just another locked door." My throat tightened. "And now I am asking if I may know you without owning any part of your life." The rain blurred the city behind him, turning headlights into small gold stars. I thought of the man who had walked into my library and made silence obey him. I thought of the man who had stood in a church and let his sister choose. They were both Adrian Blackwell, but only one of them was sitting in front of me now, waiting for an answer he had no power to command. I wrapped the scarf around my neck. "You may start with coffee," I said. "Public place. Daylight. No drivers waiting. Outside." His smile arrived slowly, like sunrise finding a room it had forgotten. "Agreed." And that was how it began, not with a claim, not with a command, but with a question finally asked the right way. He still ruled parts of the city I would never understand. But he no longer ruled the silence between us. That belonged to the truth, and, for the first time, to me.